Love is supposed to feel familiar. Two people, one connection, a story the world can easily understand and accept. But every so often, a couple appears that makes people pause. Not because their love is loud or dramatic, but because it quietly challenges what society considers normal. And that discomfort says more about us than it does about them. We like to believe we are open-minded, that we judge less than before, that acceptance comes naturally in a modern world. Yet when these relationships became public, reactions revealed a different truth: confusion, unease, and judgment disguised as concern. This video is not here to shock you, and it is not here to define what love should look like. It explores 10 real couples whose relationships expose the limits of public acceptance. So before we begin, ask yourself one thing: how open are we really? For a long time, the world only knew how to look at him one way, as a symbol, a reminder that the human spirit could overcome almost anything. Stages, spotlights, applause. His story was framed as motivation, not as a life still unfolding in real time. What rarely made headlines was something far more ordinary. He wanted what most people quietly want: partnership, companionship, someone who would choose him, not because of what he represented, but because of who he was. That question followed Nick Vujicic for years. Success never erased it, fame never answered it. And behind the speeches about resilience, there was a very human uncertainty about whether romantic love would ever feel possible. When he met Kanae, there was no dramatic announcement, no grand statement, just a connection that grew privately, away from the stage. What mattered to them did not feel extraordinary. But once their relationship became visible, the world reacted as if it were. Strangers questioned her motives. Comment sections filled with speculation. Some framed the relationship as an act of charity rather than a mutual choice. The discomfort was subtle but persistent. It revealed an unspoken belief many people still hold. That desire has rules. That attraction must look a certain way. Kanae never stepped forward to explain herself. She did not perform love for public approval. She simply stayed. Through long travel schedules, through the pressures of public attention, through the quiet work of building a family with someone whose life had always been treated as an example rather than a relationship. Today, they are raising children together, not as inspiration, not as proof, just as two people sharing responsibility, exhaustion, laughter, and commitment. Their story does not demand admiration, it earns it quietly. Because in a world that celebrates strength from a distance, they chose closeness. And sometimes, that is the braver act. Growing up, her body entered the room before she did. Long before confidence had a chance to catch up, height became the first thing people noticed, commented on, and judged. By the time she was a teenager, the whispers were constant, and the stares were unavoidable. For Elizon Silva, being different never felt empowering. It felt isolating. A rare medical condition caused her body to grow far beyond what was considered normal. And with that growth came years of bullying, curiosity disguised as concern, and a quiet belief that love might simply not be meant for her. Public attention arrived early, not as admiration, but as spectacle. Television appearances helped cover medical expenses, but they also reinforced a painful message. She was something to be looked at, not someone to be chosen. Romance felt distant, almost unrealistic, in a world that struggled to see past her height. Then she met Francinaldo Silva Carvalho. There was nothing dramatic about their first connection. No viral moment, no instant headlines. Just a man who looked at her without awe or pity and treated her presence as ordinary. That simplicity changed everything. Their relationship quickly drew attention once it became public. The contrast between their heights dominated headlines, turning their private bond into a visual comparison for strangers to analyze. But inside the relationship, the imbalance people obsessed over simply did not exist. What mattered was consistency, respect, the feeling of being seen as a whole person. Marriage did not erase the stares, and parenthood did not silence the curiosity. But together, they learned how to move through public spaces with quiet confidence, laughing off comments, protecting each other's peace, building a home where difference was not a flaw, but just a detail. Ella Sane once said that her husband saw the woman before he ever noticed the height. That distinction mattered more than any measurement. Their story is not about overcoming the body. It is about finding someone who never made it a barrier in the first place. For most of his life, he learned how to make himself smaller. not physically, but emotionally. When your body draws attention before your voice ever does, retreat can feel safer than presence. For Joelison Fernandez, height was never just a number. Caused by a medical condition, his growth came with constant pain, surgeries, and a childhood shaped by ridicule. Strangers stared, classmates laughed, and over time, isolation felt easier than hope. As he grew older, the attention did not fade. It intensified. Cameras followed him. Headlines labeled him a curiosity. The phrase gentle giant sounded kind on the surface, but it quietly reduced him to a spectacle. Romance felt distant, almost impractical, in a world that treated his body as a headline. Then came Eva Medeiros. Their connection began simply through conversation rather than chemistry. Online messages turned into long talks. Long talks turned into trust. Eva did not approach him with fascination or fear. She approached him with familiarity, as if his size required no special translation. When they appeared together in public, reactions followed quickly. The contrast between their heights became the focus, overshadowing everything else. Yet within their relationship, that contrast never carried weight. What mattered was how they moved together, how they adjusted to the world side by side, how effort flowed both ways. Marriage brought more visibility, but it also brought stability. In everyday moments, cooking, laughing, planning, their life looked remarkably ordinary, and that ordinariness mattered. It reclaimed something Jolison had been told he could never have. Eva never spoke about courage or sacrifice. She spoke about partnership, about adapting without resentment, about choosing someone fully without conditions attached. Joelison once said that love did not make him forget his body, it made him stop apologizing for it. That shift changed how he stood in the world. Their story is not about defeating difference. It is about learning that companionship can soften even the longest shadows, simply by refusing to turn away. To many people, love is supposed to be a meeting point between two individuals, separate identities, shared direction. But sometimes, the line between partnership and projection becomes harder to see. When Anastasia Rescos met Quentin Dehar, their connection immediately stood out. Not because it was private or subtle, but because it was built around a shared vision of transformation. Together, they did not just fall in love. They pursued a concept. Both were drawn to the same ideal: plastic perfection, carefully sculpted faces, bodies reshaped to resemble dolls that were never meant to age or change. Over time, surgeries became milestones, each procedure a step closer to an image they believed represented happiness. Public fascination followed quickly. Photos circulated. Headlines focused on the price tags, the procedures, the shock value. Friends and critics alike asked the same question: was this devotion to each other or devotion to an idea neither wanted to let go of? Inside the relationship, they spoke about commitment in practical terms, supporting each other through recovery, sharing goals, encouraging the next transformation. In that sense, their bond looked cooperative, even disciplined. But cooperation does not always equal intimacy, and ambition does not always leave space for vulnerability. Doctors warned them about risks. Family members expressed concern, yet the couple remained firm, framing their journey as mutual empowerment rather than obsession. To them, becoming Barbie and Ken was not an escape from reality. It was the reality they chose. What makes their story difficult to categorize is that it resists simple judgment. They did not hide their choices. They did not claim ignorance. They presented themselves openly, fully aware of the attention and the consequences. Whether this relationship represents love strengthened by shared identity or love narrowed by it depends entirely on how one defines partnership. Is it about growing together or becoming the same? Is support still healthy when it reinforces extremes? Their story does not answer those questions. It leaves them hanging. And perhaps that discomfort is the point. Age gaps in relationships often invite assumptions before understanding ever has a chance to form. People tend to reach conclusions quickly, especially when appearances suggest a story they think they already know. When Tom Crutchfield met Stacy, their connection did not begin with romance in mind. It began with reptiles, a sick iguana, a message sent online, a conversation that lingered longer than expected. What followed was gradual, practical, and unexpected for both of them. Tom was decades older, deeply rooted in his world of conservation and routine. Stacy was younger, still shaping her direction. To outsiders, the contrast felt jarring. Many assumed imbalance before asking questions. Some framed it as naivete, others as exploitation. Very few paused to consider agency on both sides. Their relationship unfolded quietly, but public perception did not. When they married, reactions ranged from disbelief to open ridicule. Strangers confused Tom for a relative rather than a partner. Comments often reduced Stacy to a stereotype, assuming motivations without evidence. Love, once again, was filtered through suspicion. Inside the relationship, the rhythm was less dramatic. They worked together, shared daily responsibilities, navigated the realities of aging, energy differences, and long-term planning. None of it fit neatly into the romantic narratives people projected onto them. Stacy's family did not accept the relationship immediately. Time, not explanation, softened resistance. Familiarity replaced fear. What mattered most was consistency, not persuasion. Happiness revealed itself in routine, not defense. What makes their story difficult is not the age gap itself, but the discomfort it triggers. It forces questions many people avoid. Who decides what is appropriate between consenting adults? Where does concern end and control begin? At what point does judgment disguise itself as protection? Their relationship does not ask for approval. It exists regardless of opinion. And whether one sees imbalance or authenticity often says more about the observer than the couple themselves. The story offers no clear verdict, only a reminder that not every relationship fits comfortably into the boxes we prefer to keep intact. Some stories make people uncomfortable not because they are loud, but because they expose how fragile certain boundaries really are. This was one of them. In a small village in South Africa, Sanele Masalela stood dressed as a groom. He was 9 years old. Beside him was Helen Shabangu, a woman in her 60s, already a wife and a mother. The ceremony was public, the photographs were real, and the reaction was immediate. To much of the world, the images felt impossible to process. Anger followed quickly, accusations of abuse, demands for intervention. The situation appeared clear to outsiders, framed through modern ideas of consent, childhood, and protection. Inside the community, the explanations sounded very different. According to the family, the boy claimed ancestral spirits had instructed him to marry. Helen agreed to the ritual as a cultural obligation, not a romantic union. Her husband and children attended the ceremony without protest, treating it as symbolic rather than legal. That distinction did little to calm international outrage. The idea that a child could stand at the center of such a ritual unsettled even those familiar with cultural relativism. Where tradition was cited, others saw risk. Where symbolism was emphasized, others saw harm. What made the situation more disturbing was the absence of a clear authority willing to intervene decisively. Officials hesitated. The marriage was described as non-binding. The boy was said to continue attending school, yet the images remained, circulating without context, stripped of explanation, and heavy with implication. Helen insisted there was no intimacy, no coercion, only obedience to belief. Sanele said he wanted to grow up normally, to study, to someday marry someone his own age. Those statements existed alongside photographs that told a very different story. The question this story raises is not simple. It sits at the intersection of faith, culture, power, and child protection. It asks whether intention can outweigh impact and whether tradition can ever justify discomfort this profound. The story ends without resolution, only unease, and the reminder that some boundaries, once crossed, cannot be explained away. Loneliness rarely looks dramatic from the outside. Most of the time, it is quiet, repetitive, something people learn to live around rather than confront directly. For Akihiko Kondo, loneliness arrived early and stayed. Years of bullying and social withdrawal taught him that human connection came with risk. Rejection was not an exception in his life. It was a pattern. Over time, avoidance felt safer than hope. Then there was Hatsune Miku. To the world, she existed only as software, a stylized voice, an animated figure projected through a device. But to Akihiko, she represented something real in its effect, if not its form. She was consistent, predictable, free from judgment, a presence that never turned away. When he announced their marriage in 2018, public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Headlines treated it as spectacle. Comment sections questioned his sanity. His parents refused to attend the ceremony. The focus was never on how the relationship functioned, only on how it looked. What makes this story unsettling is not the technology involved, but the response to it. Society insists that love must meet certain criteria to be considered valid. It must be physical, reciprocal in familiar ways, socially legible. Anything outside those boundaries is dismissed, regardless of its emotional impact. Through a holographic interface, Miku greeted Akihiko when he came home. She spoke simple phrases, sang songs. At night, he placed a wedding ring on a physical representation of her. Critics called it delusion. He called it routine, stability, relief. Thousands of others in Japan quietly entered similar symbolic relationships, most choosing anonymity after watching how harshly Akihiko was treated for visibility. The message was clear. Difference was tolerated only when it remained invisible. This story does not ask whether the marriage is real. It asks something more uncomfortable. What happens when human connection becomes so fraught that predictability feels safer than people? Akihiko never claimed his relationship should be understood, only that it allowed him to live without constant fear. And in that silence, a darker question lingers. For a long time, love felt like something meant for other people, something she could observe but never fully claim for herself. Growing up, her body became a target long before it became her own. Comments came early, jokes followed, and slowly confidence learned how to disappear. For Amy Jennings, years of bullying left marks that were not visible. Self-worth eroded quietly. At her lowest points, she questioned whether anyone could ever choose her without conditions. In a culture obsessed with appearance, invisibility can feel safer than rejection. Love entered her life in an unexpected way, not through attention or pursuit, but through conversation. A video game, late nights talking, shared humor. That was how she met Sean. He did not approach her with curiosity about her body. He approached her with interest in her voice, her thoughts, her presence. When they decided to meet in person, fear followed closely behind hope. She worried that disappointment would replace affection, that reality would undo what distance had allowed to exist. Instead, the connection deepened. The person who had listened so closely online was exactly the same in real life. Public reaction was less kind. Sean had never dated a plus-size woman before, and that fact alone became ammunition for strangers. Some questioned his intentions. Others treated the relationship as temporary or experimental. The criticism grew louder when his family struggled to accept the relationship, creating distance that never fully healed. What makes their story quietly powerful is not defiance, but choice. Sean stayed, not loudly. Not to prove a point, he chose partnership over approval, even when it came at personal cost. Amy, in turn, learned how to trust love without shrinking herself to fit expectation. Years later, they built a life together, grounded in routine rather than resistance. Marriage did not erase judgment, but it made it irrelevant. Their bond was no longer theoretical. It was practiced daily. Their relationship does not ask to be celebrated. It simply exists as evidence that love can grow strongest when it is allowed to be ordinary. He grew up being told exactly who he was before he ever had a chance to decide for himself. The words were cruel, repetitive, so common that they stopped sounding like insults and started feeling like facts. For Godfrey Baguma, appearance shaped his life early. A rare medical condition altered his face and body, making ridicule unavoidable. Poverty followed, opportunities disappeared, and for a long time, survival mattered more than dignity. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of hiding, Godfrey stepped directly into the mockery. He entered a public contest built to humiliate and won. The title was harsh, but the outcome was different. Fame arrived, money followed, and with it, the power to define himself on his own terms. What surprised many people was not his visibility, but his personal life. Godfrey married, then married again, and again. To outsiders, the reaction was immediate skepticism. People questioned motives, accused his partners of chasing money or attention. Love, once again, was treated as implausible when it did not align with appearance. Inside the family, the story sounded far less dramatic. His wives spoke about humor, patience, and care. About a man who provided, listened, and showed up consistently. Godfrey himself spoke openly about affection, about wanting companionship rather than admiration. His home filled with children, laughter, and noise. The opposite of isolation, health challenges followed. His condition brought complications, and doctors warned of risks that could not be ignored. Yet even then, Godfrey continued performing, supporting his family, and refusing to retreat into shame. Public perception softened slowly, not through argument, but through visibility that refused to collapse. What makes his story quietly admirable is not triumph over cruelty, but refusal to internalize it. He did not ask the world to change its standards of beauty. He simply built a life where those standards stopped mattering. Love did not erase the insults. It made them irrelevant. And in that shift, something rare emerged. Not pity, not inspiration, just respect. For most people, marriage is defined by a single promise between two individuals. Anything outside that frame is often dismissed before it is understood. For Joe Darger, that definition never applied. His family structure included 3 wives living under one roof, raising more than 20 children together. What shocked the public was not just the number, but the openness. This was not secrecy. It was a lifestyle presented without apology. Joe first married Alina, then entered a relationship with Vicky, who later encouraged him to marry her identical twin, Valerie, after she escaped an abusive marriage. To outsiders, the story sounded impossible, even manipulative. Critics assumed control, coercion, or religious pressure. Supporters argued choice, faith, and autonomy. Inside the household, the structure was rigid but deliberate. Separate bedrooms, rotating schedules, clear rules designed to reduce jealousy and conflict. Joe described his role as mediator rather than authority. The wives described shared responsibility rather than competition. Whether that balance was sustainable remained a matter of debate. Public reaction was relentless. Polygamy is illegal in the United States, and media attention framed the family as either victims or extremists. Very few discussions allowed for complexity. Either the women were brainwashed, or Joe was a visionary. Nuance rarely survived the headlines. What complicates the narrative is consistency. The family did not collapse. Children grew up. Daily life continued. Arguments happened, but so did routines, cooperation, and mutual reliance. None of it resembled the chaos many expected. Still, questions linger. Can power ever be evenly distributed in a structure like this? Can emotional needs truly be met when divided? Does consent remain stable over time, or does it shift under pressure? The Darger family does not offer answers. They simply exist, challenging assumptions by refusing to fit into a framework most people rely on to feel secure about love. And that discomfort may be the point. Because when love multiplies instead of narrowing, it forces observers to confront where tolerance ends and judgment begins. When people talk about love, they often speak in absolutes. Right or wrong, normal or strange, acceptable or unacceptable. But as these stories show, love rarely lives inside clean definitions. Some of these couples inspire admiration. Others create discomfort. A few may even feel impossible to defend, yet all of them reveal something quietly important. Our reactions say as much about us as they do about the relationships themselves. We are quick to celebrate love when it looks familiar, when it reassures us, when it fits the shape we expect, but when it challenges identity, tradition, or comfort, acceptance becomes conditional. This video does not ask you to approve of every story you just heard. It asks you to notice where your judgment begins and why. So now, the conversation shifts to you. Which story made you pause the longest? Which relationship challenged you the most? And where do you personally draw the line between understanding and rejection? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes, the most revealing part of these stories is not the love itself, but how we choose to respond to it.